All right, welcome to the deep dive. Tonight, we're tackling a case that, well, it remains deeply unsettling and intensely scrutinized even decades later. We are looking into the killing of JonBenét Ramsey.
Yeah, it's a subject where the public narrative has often really overshadowed the documented facts. And the evidence itself is just open to so many interpretations. That makes the material you've shared, perfect for this kind of focused analysis.
Exactly. Our goal here isn't really to resolve anything. It's more about taking this stack of your sources, the articles, reports, notes, and just really sifting through them. We want to pull out the crucial bits of knowledge, the surprising facts, the documented contradictions, really understand what the material tells us about this enduring mystery.
Right. We'll navigate through the different perspectives presented in the sources, look closely at the evidence as it's described, and see what insights we can maybe glean from the information itself, sort of separate from all the noise that has surrounded this case for so long.
So let's explore what we can learn from this deep dive just for you. Okay, let's start by grounding ourselves in the basics, just based on the sources you gave us. JonBenét Ramsey. She was a 6-year-old girl, known publicly partly for her involvement in child beauty pageants, lived in Boulder, Colorado.
And her family included her father, John Ramsey. He was president of the company, Access Graphics. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen. And her older brother, Burke. He was 9 at the time. The sources also mentioned John had children from a previous marriage and that Patsy had previously battled cancer.
And the timeline is obviously crucial here. According to your sources, JonBenét died sometime on the night of December 25th, 1996. Her body wasn't discovered until the next day, December 26th, in the family home.
Yeah, and the autopsy confirmed the cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. It was officially ruled a homicide, no question there.
Okay, so let's shift focus to that critical morning, December 26th, 1996. The sources are clear. Only the immediate family, John, Patsy, Burke, were known to be in the house that night.
Things start early. Patsy calls 911 at 5:52 a.m. She reports finding a ransom note on the kitchen staircase. But interestingly, the note apparently said not to contact anyone. Yes, she also called family and friends right after calling the police.
Police arrived super fast, within 3 minutes. Their initial search, maybe a bit cursory, didn't find obvious signs of forced entry. Though later on, the sources do point out things like unlocked windows, a broken basement window, an unlocked door, details that came up later.
And there's a particularly notable detail, according to the material, kind of an early potential misstep. An officer checked a basement door, saw it was latched from the inside, and ruled it out as an exit. Which makes sense for an exit, maybe, but less so if you're thinking someone might still be in the house.
Right, and because the initial belief was kidnapping, this led to significant problems right away. The crime scene just wasn't properly secured. Only JonBenét's bedroom was sealed off, other areas left open. And sources say visiting family and friends actually started cleaning the kitchen.
Cleaning the kitchen, wow. Potentially destroying crucial evidence.
Yeah. And despite this really long, detailed ransom note demanding $118,000.
No one ever tried to claim the money. That call never came.
So hours go by, nothing happens with the ransom. It's not until around 1 p.m. that afternoon. A detective asks John Ramsey and a family friend to do another, more thorough search of the house.
And that's when John finds JonBenét's body. In that basement room, the one behind the latched door the first officer hadn't really focused on.
The sources describe what John found. Duct tape over her mouth, a nylon cord, like a garrote, around her neck and wrists. And her torso was covered by a white blanket.
And then, tragically, John picks up her body, carries her upstairs. Completely understandable reaction for a father.
Right.
From an investigative standpoint.
It further compromised the scene, absolutely. A scene that was already pretty compromised.
Exactly.
The Ramseys did give initial samples pretty quickly, handwriting, blood, hair. John and Patsy were interviewed for, over 2 hours that first day?
Yeah, and Burke was interviewed too, but that was within a few weeks.
Okay, let's really dig into the evidence itself now, because this is where the sources lay out so many complexities. And, frankly, contradictions. Starting with the autopsy findings.
So the autopsy confirms strangulation, yes, but also a skull fracture, a significant head injury. It also noted a vaginal injury. That injury appeared to have been wiped. So while it wasn't described as a conventional rape, sexual assault couldn't be ruled out.
And the garrote, the thing used for strangulation.
Right, the reports say it was made from nylon cord and part of a paintbrush handle, broken handle. Interestingly, the top part, the bristle end, was found in Patsy's art supplies. But the bottom third of that handle, sources, it was missing. Never found, apparently.
Okay. Then there's the pineapple. This detail always struck me as odd in the reports. The autopsy found vegetable or fruit material, likely pineapple, in her stomach, meaning she ate it, just hours before she died.
And crime scene photos show a bowl of pineapple with a spoon on the kitchen table that morning. But here's the thing. According to the sources, neither John nor Patsy remembered feeding her pineapple that night or seeing her eat it. Patsy's fingerprints were reportedly found on that bowl, though.
That timing, the lack of memory, it's a detail the sources really highlight as, puzzling. Makes you wonder about those last few hours.
It absolutely does. Who was with her? What exactly happened?
And probably the most debated piece of physical evidence, based on these sources, the ransom note. Patsy found it, he said, on the kitchen staircase. And it wasn't just a few lines, it was long, 2.5 pages, handwritten.
Demanding $118,000, which, as John apparently noted, was almost exactly the amount of his recent work bonus.
Right. That detail apparently made police look initially at people from his company, Access Graphics.
And the language in the note. The material says it seemed to echo dialogue from movies, like specific films.
Yeah.
The FBI apparently found it unusual too, very long for a ransom note, and they thought it was rare for a note like that to be written at the scene. Plus, it was written on a pen and notepad from inside the Ramsey house.
Okay, but fingerprints. What did they find on the note itself and the practice draft they found?
According to the sources, only Patsy's fingerprints and those of the authorities handling the note were found. No unknown prints.
So handwriting analysis becomes critical here and, conflicting.
Very conflicting. There's a Colorado Bureau of Investigation report, the CBI report, that noted indications that the author is Patricia Ramsey. But it also explicitly stated it wasn't definitive, couldn't be certain. Then later you have a federal court ruling citing 6 certified handwriting experts who concluded it was highly unlikely Patsy wrote it.
Highly unlikely. So experts looking at the same thing coming to very different conclusions.
Exactly. And forensic pathologist Michael Baden is also cited in your material. He felt the note was unusual, probably not written by an outside stranger. It just didn't fit that profile. It really shows you the challenge with interpreting that kind of evidence.
Definitely. And speaking of conflicting interpretations, let's get into the DNA evidence. This is huge. In 2003, they got a male DNA profile, right? From a mixed blood sample on JonBenét's underwear. Didn't match anyone in the family. Didn't match anyone in CODIS, the FBI database, at the time.
Right. Then jump forward to 2016. Using more sensitive techniques, newer analysis reportedly suggested genetic markers from possibly 2 unknown individuals in that original sample, not just 1.
2.
Yeah.
Okay. So the debate around this DNA is just central, reading these sources. You have a former DA investigator, Jim Kohler, claiming there was more male DNA too. On the cord, on the paintbrush handle, he suggested maybe 6 unknown DNA samples total from different items.
And experts like former FBI profiler Candace DeLong, former DA Bob Grant, they seem to see this DNA as absolutely key, like this points directly to the killer. But then you have other experts cited, like Michael Baden again, and another former DA investigator, Gordon Coombs, urging caution. They emphasize how sensitive trace DNA is, how easily it can be transferred. Contamination's a huge concern, especially given how the crime scene was handled initially. Coombs specifically questioned clearing someone just based on touch DNA, given the potential for it getting there innocently.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the impact of this DNA finding was massive, wasn't it? In 2008, the DA at the time, Mary Lacey, publicly stated the touch DNA results exonerated the Ramseys, cleared them.
She did. But then years later, the former Boulder police chief, Mark Beckner, publicly disagreed with that blanket exoneration. He argued the DNA hadn't been definitively linked to the crime itself. Like, they couldn't prove it was deposited during the murder, or that it was definitely from the perpetrator.
Wow. So even the official interpretation is contested later on.
Absolutely. This DNA evidence and the wildly differing expert takes on what it means, its reliability. It just perfectly illustrates how one piece of forensic evidence, even with improving tech, can be spun in completely different ways, especially in a messy scene.
Okay, let's talk about the investigation itself. The sources point out some pretty significant challenges and errors right from the get-go. The police seem to focus very heavily, almost exclusively, on the parents initially.
Yeah, the sources cite several potential errors.
Yeah.
That loss or contamination of evidence because the scene wasn't secure, a lack of personnel experienced in, this type of major homicide, evidence reportedly being shared with the Ramseys early on, delays in formal interviews.
And there were also reports of misleading information being leaked by the police, maybe to pressure the family.
Yes, potentially as a tactic to get more cooperation, which of course just fueled the media frenzy around the Ramseys even more.
And this wasn't a smooth investigation internally either, was it? There was conflict?
Definitely not. You had Detective Lou Smith. He strongly believed in an intruder theory. He actually resigned. He felt the police department wasn't taking his lead seriously enough, overlooking evidence pointing away from the family. But then on the flip side, you had Detective Steve Thomas. He leaned more towards a family theory. He resigned too, believing the district attorney's office was interfering, maybe hindering the investigation against the Ramseys.
So professionals on the inside, deeply involved, leaving because they fundamentally disagreed on the direction.
Exactly. Polar opposite reasons for leaving, essentially.
Then came the grand jury, convened in 1998. What did the sources say about that?
Well, in 1999, that grand jury reportedly voted to indict the parents. The charges mentioned were things like child abuse resulting in death, the idea being they placed JonBenét at risk, leading to her death. But the DA at the time, Alex Hunter, decided not to prosecute.
Why not, if the grand jury voted to indict?
He stated publicly he didn't believe there was enough evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard needed for a criminal trial conviction, which is much higher than probable cause needed for an indictment. And the fact the grand jury voted that way wasn't even publicly known until 2013. It was kept secret for years.
Wow, okay. And then the official stance shifted again under the next DA, Mary Lacy, starting in 2002.
Right. She took over, and she leaned very strongly towards the intruder theory. She even publicly agreed with a federal judge's comments in a separate libel lawsuit. That judge had said the evidence seemed more consistent with a theory that an intruder murdered JonBenét. Then, as we mentioned, she's the one who issued that public exoneration letter in 2008 based on a touch DNA.
But despite that exoneration letter, the case is still open.
Still open. Boulder police took the case back in 2009, reopened it as a cold case in 2010. The sources confirmed that as of 2016, it was still considered an active homicide investigation. So that disagreement about the exoneration, especially among former officials, it clearly persists. It wasn't universally accepted.
Okay, so taking all that, the evidence, the investigation's rocky path, what does it tell us about the main competing theories, as laid out in your sources? You've basically got two camps, the family member theory and the intruder theory.
Right. The family member theory often starts with crime statistics. Sadly, child homicides often involve family or caregivers. Arguments supporting it in this case, per the sources, include that initial report of no forced entry, though again, those later details about windows complicated, and evidence suggesting staging, particularly the ransom note, its contents, its length. In fact, it was written inside the house on their notepad.
And the Ramseys' behavior early on, that was also questioned.
Yes, their initial actions, perceived reluctance by some investigators to fully cooperate early on, those became points of focus for people supporting this theory. Scenarios proposed, just based on the sources, range from, Patsy maybe striking JonBenét in a rage, perhaps over bedwetting, maybe the pineapple incident, and then staging the scene. The strangulation maybe being a red herring to cover the head wound.
What about Burke, the older brother?
He was 9. He was interviewed multiple times. The police and DA in 1999 didn't consider him a suspect. A psychologist cited noted sort of healthy family dynamics. Much later, though, a CBS docuseries did put forward a theory that Burke might have accidentally killed her, which led to him suing them for defamation.
Okay, so that's the family angle. What about the intruder theory? What evidence supports that, according to the sources?
Proponents point to different things. There's an unidentified boot mark found in the basement near the body. Those unlocked or broken windows we mentioned. Detective Lou Smith strongly believes someone came in through a broken basement window, maybe used a suitcase found nearby to get over it.
But wasn't there something about cobwebs?
Yeah, critics of that specific window entry point noted undisturbed cobwebs on the window grate, questioning if someone could have come through without disturbing them. John E. Douglas, the FBI profiler cited in the material, also pointed to what he saw as stun gun marks on JonBenét's body. He felt that indicated an intruder subduing her.
And the DNA evidence.
That's a huge pillar for the intruder theory, that unidentified male DNA found on her underwear. The sources also mentioned the area having a relatively high crime rate, registered sex offenders nearby. Various individuals were looked at over the years as potential suspects: a neighbor, a reporter who covered pageants, the family housekeeper. Others, like Michael Helgoth, Gary Howard Oliva, names popped up in the files.
And the federal judge in that libel suit?
Right. That judge explicitly stated there was abundant evidence supporting an intruder theory and virtually no evidence supporting the theory that Patsy did it. And DA Mary Lacy, as we said, strongly backed the intruder theory, largely because of the DNA.
This case also had that really bizarre false confession incident, didn't it? John Mark Carr in 2006.
Oh yeah, that was a huge media event. He was arrested in Thailand after claiming he drugged, sexually assaulted, and accidentally killed JonBenét.
But it just fell apart, right?
Completely. The autopsy showed no drugs in her system. His story didn't have any details that weren't already public knowledge. And crucially, his DNA did not match the male DNA profile found on JonBenét's clothing. Total dead end for the investigation, despite the massive headlines.
And the media's role throughout this whole thing, it's been immense, constant scrutiny.
Absolutely massive. Worldwide focus from day one, scrutinizing the family's wealth, JonBenét's pageant background, debating the evidence constantly, often pointing fingers at the police, at the family.
Which led to lawsuits.
Multiple defamation lawsuits filed by the Ramseys and others against media outlets, authors, publishers, even specific experts who made accusations. We mentioned the federal judge's findings in one suit favoring the intruder theory, and Burke Ramsey settled his lawsuit against CBS and the experts involved in that docuseries that accused him. So these legal battles, running parallel to the criminal case, added another layer of complexity, more public debate, more official findings, even if just in the civil context.
So, okay, we've really walked through the information you provided, traced the events from that awful night in 1996, through the investigation, the evidence, all the competing theories, the legal fallout, all just based on these sources. It's undeniably incredibly complex, full of conflicting evidence, major investigative hurdles, and ultimately, it remains unresolved despite just immense attention.
Yeah, and looking at the material this way, just focusing purely on the documented information and the different interpretations you find right there within that material, it really highlights the ambiguity. It underscores why you need critical thinking when you see different experts focusing on different things, like the whole DNA debate. What does it really mean? Or getting opposite conclusions from the same handwriting sample. It just shows how a case can stay stubbornly unsolved, with seemingly strong arguments for completely different scenarios, even after all this time and effort.
We've sifted through the details, the perspectives presented in your sources. As you listen, what stands out to you?
Maybe as you reflect on this deep dive, consider this. How do those pieces of evidence that seem to point in totally opposite directions, like, say, the ransom note written inside the house demanding the dad's exact bonus, how does that sit alongside the unidentified male DNA found on her clothes? How do you hold both those possibilities? And based on the range of opinions we've seen just in these sources, can a case like this ever be truly cleared based mainly on one type of evidence, like touch DNA, when other evidence, or maybe the lack of certain evidence, seems to pull you in another direction?
Definitely something to ponder as you continue exploring this fascinating and ultimately very tragic case. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.